Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, nice to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
I am doing well.
Good.
And ready and raring to solve another problem.
That's one day, one problem.
Do you keep a record of the problems we solve, or do you keep a record of the problems that we know the answer to that nobody pays any attention to? It's a game we play,
Yeah.
but for me, it's an intellectual game because ideas are difficult to, actually measure when they have an effect.
Yeah.
And sometimes ideas spread and nobody even knows it. So that's why I'm an optimist. I think people are out there talking about liberty, and the scoundrels who are running our governments now these days, I think there's more and more people. Maybe freedom is a good idea, especially when they see so many failures, whether it's our economy. I don't think we're doing such a hot job on controlling viral infections for sure.
No.
But one thing I wanted to emphasize today is something we've talked about in the past. When the biggest news occurs, and of course right now I think the biggest news is the virus.
Yeah.
And everybody's concentrating on it, and they're talking about the pros and cons and what has to be done and how much is it going to cost. At the same time, other things are going on, and that's what people shouldn't forget.
Yeah.
And of course, in our title, we suggest to keep an eye on Pompeo.
Yeah.
And this may be one of the most opportune times any individual like himself has, because there's not a whole lot of people, keeping a close eye on him. I thought anti-war did a good job, but they had several things going on how the military buildup has not backed off one bit. The training going on and the threats toward Iran, they're still there. And who's going to protect us? In the foreign policy now. Pompeo is the Secretary of State, but then we have Abrams in Venezuela.
Yeah.
He's going to solve that problem. They have a proposal down there, but I think because that is so bad, and that Maduro, is still in charge, that they haven't gained that much. But it looks like there's a proposal there that, let's have a deal now. And but their goal of the United States is get Guaido back. He's the elected president. We need to give him a little bit of stature. But there's a lot right now. We get statistics. How many have the disease on the virus? How many people have died? And how many people are going to die next week? On and on. But it's sort of a narrow approach, and it's a new virus, they admit, but it's an old virus in the sense of the characteristics. It's a family of viruses. It represents viral infections, and it's just that there's a lot of questions being asked, I think good ones now. Maybe this virus isn't just like, I have a strep throat. It's strep. What's the antibiotic for a strep? I give them penicillin. You take care of the strep throat. I think they're starting to recognize that maybe this is a little bit more complex than I do, because one thing that I think of a lot, and we've mentioned, is having an immune system that protects us. And of course, Doctor, I call him, he's probably PhD started, has a lot of good advice on and building up immunity. But you have you have the infection. It could be in combination with other drugs that confuses people. Age, everybody talks about the age. The older people end up getting it more easily. There's other factors. Habits are factors. Nutrition is factors. What exercise is factor. Just getting out. What percentage of sunlight are you getting these days? And these are the kind of things that are variables. And maybe the virus itself is not deadly, and it needs a combination. It needs something to ignite it and make it much worse. So they're talking about this, but believe me, government research is motivated by who gets the contract to make the vaccine. And I remember that so well in '76 that I've mentioned, is they worked real hard, real fast, and gave a vaccine that killed more people than the virus did back then. So that's why markets should work. If there are free markets, people should be competitive, and vaccines shouldn't be outlawed, but common sense should direct it. And instead of politics, just think of the worst thing I think coming out of this is people are so scared, that they know they have to do something. And if you suggest we need a $500 billion appropriation to help out on it, oh, that's not enough. $1 trillion maybe. I think you're up to like $6 trillion, and it just was announced this week that the foreign central banks now are on the receiving end too. The only thing holding this back is a trust and illusion that we can print forever and that the dollar will remain strong forever, but something that can't remain strong forever with this type of policy usually never does. So there's a lot of factors going on here, but I wanted to talk with you a little bit about what should we be paying a lot of attention to, and we have talked about our Secretary of State, and I think he might be feeling pretty good because people aren't watching that much, and this is a good excuse, for him to get busy and aggravate things. And right now, things are still being aggravated when it comes to Iran.
Yeah, and the whole thing about the virus is it is a numbers game. And that numbers game is meant to terrify people because the way they're measuring and testing is so unscientific, and I'm not even a scientist and I can see it. They're testing people who are symptomatic. And of those people, there's a certain percent who get ill and end up in the hospital. But the reality, and many studies have shown, I think the Oxford study and others, that the people that are symptomatic may only represent 5% of those that have the virus. So instead of this huge pool of people that may have it, they're testing this concentrated pool of people who are symptomatic. And even among those, the death rate is relatively low. So it's used to propagandize, it's used to force the president, I think, in some ways, into doing things that probably his better instincts tell him not to do. It's used to lock down the healthy instead of quarantining the sick, which is the weirdest thing I've ever heard of. And, we had last weekend the situation where the president did want to have an Easter resurrection. We're going to start the economy back. We're going to be positive. Well, then Fauci and his team sat him down and said, Mr. President, best case scenario, 1 to 200,000 Americans are going to die even with these lockdown measures. And if you do nothing, it's going to be 2 million. So the president is thinking, hey, I'm going to get blamed for every death. He's damned if he does and damned if he doesn't. Because if he opens it up and a few people die, it's Trump's fault. But if he doesn't, the consequences not only to the economy, but even to our mental and physical health of being locked up are huge. So he's in a huge bind. People like Fauci who are grabbing the microphone, his doomsday team is propagandizing him, and it's an absolute mess. And we'll get into it later because while Trump is being battered around like a tennis ball by these guys, Pompeo knows exactly what he wants, and he is on the warpath.
Yeah, not many people are coming down hard on him, except a few people we know, realizing what he's really up to. But, in sorting all this out and all the tests that they're doing and the statistics and the investigations and working on a drug to kill the virus and also for a vaccine, in medicine, if you're testing things, they usually want double-blind studies and control groups to compare one with the other. But there's very little, around to compare it to. And I thought it was an interesting article. It's a preliminary article as far as what the conclusion are, and that is Sweden.
Yeah.
Found out that, the Swedes aren't the most authoritarian government in the world because they said, we'll give you a little advice, but you take care of yourselves.
Yeah.
And they've gone about their activity. The infection is in the country. It's significant. Some people have died from it, but they're not panicked. They haven't quite reached the point of where we are. We're locked in our own houses. Yeah. That is the most insane thing that we permit. When they're not hauling us off to prisons. They just come along and say, you're to stay in your house. And the threats, these local thugs, and those are usually the politicians. Yeah. If you come out of your house, we're going to arrest you. And now, at one time, I think maybe we talked and they sort of suggested, well, it can't be that bad because what are they going to do, stop every car on the highway and check you? Well, that's what they're doing. Yeah. And that's the employment rate is going to go up when it comes to authoritarians arresting us. And that is a sad story. But I'm sort of hoping that as this winds on, the best scenario that I personally hope for is about a month from now that we'll have more statistics to show it's dropping off, and the panic will lighten up a little bit, and because I think a few people have backtracked on their dire predictions.
Big time, yeah.
Yeah, and that's good. So I think in a month from now, if the statistics, if everybody's on the down slope, boy, I'll bet you they'll all of a sudden they'll change their tune. They'll find something else. Maybe they'll even start talking about the Federal Reserve or something. But no, the bigger issues, the war issues, the monetary system, the economic controls, and why we have depressions and all this, that's not on the agenda. It's this evil virus that if you don't do exactly as we say, we'll blame everything on the president. That is a consequence of this, which obviously is wrong.
Yeah, I mean, and if, like you suspect, in a month the numbers didn't add up to where they were scaremongering, they're going to take credit for it. See, we had to lock you in your homes for your own good. We got to do it next time, too. Every time there's a sniffle out there, we got to shut down the economy. It reminds me of what happened with the neocons when it finally became obvious that Saddam did not have weapons of mass destruction. They didn't say, oh, you got us, we're wrong, we were so dumb, you know. They said, well, it's a good thing we went in there and stopped him, for other reasons. They're always having another excuse. So it's dangerous. And we talked about before the show that our good friend Bob Wenzel had a piece up about, to solve this problem of this self-selected group that's testing, maybe the idea would be to do a random test of the population, just pick 1,000 people, very randomly like they do exit polling, and see what it means, just in general. So that might be a thought. But then again, that might tamp down the panic. But, moving on to what we were talking about with the foreign policy and Pompeo on the warpath, I got a couple of emails from our good friend Colonel Doug McGregor this morning who had some really interesting insights. He in his view, it's a really dangerous moment for Trump. And I don't think he minds me saying this, what was in our emails, but Trump is preoccupied with this virus crisis. But Pompeo and the neocons are, as we said, on the warpath. They are literally launching plots against Venezuela, Syria, Iran, putting Russia against Turkey, doing other things like this. They're go, go, go. The thing is that Trump has always been able at the last minute to say, hang on a minute, Mike, take it easy, take a deep breath, eat another Twinkie, just relax. We're not going to have a war with Iran. But he is so distracted now because of this, there's a danger that he won't be there to stop it at the last minute. The last thing Trump needs right now, with the economy in tatters, with this virus thing, the last thing he needs is a foolish war somewhere in the world, because that will be pinned on him, and that will be devastating to his presidency. But again, he may be so distracted he can't stop it.
The president has a lot of respect for the military. We all know that. And there's advice coming from a general, and I hope I have this straight. But Iraq is worried right now that we're going to, or maybe in the middle of bombing the militias, which may be loyal, to Iran and more Hezbollah. And the Iraq government isn't so annoyed about this, but Pompeo's very annoyed about this. But the general, I think his name is General White, Lieutenant General White, He's spoken out, or at least we know what he thinks. He says this could be a bad idea. You do that, and if you hit those militias like that, they will retaliate. So in some ways, this lull in our concern about what Pompeo is doing, it also may explode too. If he goes ahead and continues to do this, this might be the time for the opposition to say, this is the time we strike back. And I think Pompeo might even be calculating that we have Iran on the ropes. We've destroyed their infrastructure. That we've denied them medications, and they have the worst scenario for coronaviruses. So he's maybe looking at this and saying, this is the time we hit them. But it also may be the time that some unexpected retaliation by Iran might occur, and that could be this explosion that you fear that that would accelerate and make and by that time the coronavirus hysteria may have gone way down. It may hopefully disappear.
Yeah, and you know what? I think what a lot of Americans don't really understand is that the neocons, they love to wrap themselves in the flag, but they actually hate the military. They really hate the military. They looked at them as just a bunch of dupes out there to be put up and shot and killed. 1,000 troops, take them, send them over there. They don't care. Put them in a dumb war, 58,000 dead in Vietnam, anywhere. They don't care. And that's what's happening. There was a report on Friday that the Pentagon had ordered at the behest of Pompeo, who's the Secretary of State, the head diplomat of the country, but reported that they should declare war on the Shia militias in Iraq. This is Pompeo's order, as you said, taking advantage of the fact that in their perception, Iran is on its back heels because of this disease. They're desperate to draw Iran into a war, though. So if they declare war on the Shia militias in Iraq, that would, they hope, provoke Iran to response. There's no evidence that it's the Shia militias who are attacking the U.S. occupied bases in Iraq. On the contrary, Iraqi officials keep saying over and over again, it's not the Shia that are doing it. It's not the Shia. It's ISIS. It's other groups. But the neocons are determined to pin the blame on the Shia as an excuse to start the war. We're even deploying Patriot missiles in Iraq now with this excuse of fighting these militias. Patriot missile against a little hand-fired rocket. It's a joke. It's not even proportionate. It's using a sledgehammer to kill a gnat. So they really are on the warpath.
You know, and the troop positioning in that area has not backed down a bit. If anything, they add, they have them, they shift them around. It's all in preparation, on at least on paper, looks like, well, they're preparing for that hit. But they've been doing this for a long time, and they're waiting for that time when they really go ahead and attack. But the General White said, you know, if you do that and you accelerate, you're going to need a lot more troops than we have there. They're assuming so often they may dislike the military, but they probably don't understand military operations. Yeah. Sometimes they get out of hand. They probably didn't say, well, we have to go to Vietnam because 60,000 doesn't mean it. In their policies, it really doesn't. Yeah. But they probably don't start off with that. They just go and do it and say, well, we have to pay the price that it takes for us to be in charge. So, but I believe this general, and that especially if and when the coronavirus fear is dwindled down, and people say, oh yeah, let's send more troops and they'll be riled up. But I am hoping that the American people, they've generally been always against the wars that begin, and Trump has been in a good position on many of these, and it's usually when it gets bad, and then they can excite the people and say, look at what they did. They killed 2 Americans yesterday, and therefore we have to destroy Tehran. You know, the hysteria seems to be transferred from one thing to another. Rational thinking is something that's pretty scarce in Washington, D.C., and especially with those neocons who run things from behind the scenes.
Yeah. And the thing that you say about, you know, what the neocons always say, it's going to be a cakewalk. You know, it's easy for them to say, of course, because they're in their air-conditioned offices. It's not our fault. It's the troops. You know, they didn't get it done. It should have been a cakewalk. But we shouldn't leave without talking about Venezuela, and you touched on it earlier in the show. But, you know, the AP is reporting that the U.S. is planning a transition in Venezuela. You know, it's the same old story, promises of sanctions relief in exchange for regime change. They're just basically dusting off their policy of last year and reintroducing it. Same with Iran, hoping that because Venezuela is on its back because of a serious medical crisis in general caused by our sanctions, but exacerbated by the virus, they're hoping that now they've got him on the ropes. But, you know, it's basically Guaido's plan that we'll have a transition government. It won't be me and it won't be Maduro, it'll be someone different. You know, it's the same old thing, but they're taking advantage of it. But what's more troubling is that it looks like they might be gaining a little bit of ground, the Elliott Abrams Pompeo faction. Here's the U.S. Southern Command testifying before Congress on earlier this month, Admiral Fowler, quote, there will be an increase in U.S. military presence in the hemisphere this year. This will include an enhanced presence of ships, aircraft, and security forces to reassure our partners and counter a range of threats to include illicit narco-terrorism. Now, just after that, if you remember, Maduro, the president of Venezuela, was indicted by our Justice Department as a narco-terrorist. Guess who was behind that? Our Attorney General Bill Barr. As Dave DeCamp wrote in antiwar.com, reprinted on our website recently, it's the same Bill Barr who greenlit the U.S. invasion of Panama to get Noriega after he was designated a drug trafficker. And this is true even though Venezuela is only a minor transit country when it comes to. So they're pulling out the same Noriega playbook against Maduro and Venezuela all over again.
you know, when they offer up a proposal like this, say, we'll give you Maduro, you give us Guaido, and we'll go from there. I think it's a sign of a weakness on their part, because it doesn't come across as strong as Guaido has to be the individual. That doesn't mean that's still might be their goal.
Yeah.
But right now they say, oh boy. But that kind of rational activity occurred in Syria. They would offer some peace treaties, but we still have Assad in charge. And they were doing things because they, quite frankly, had been losing the war, and that is the big thing that we have to watch, because the militarism is not going to go away because of these. It'll never go away because there's not enough money. They would drain every penny and every nickel of wealth from this country if we're under attack, and that's all they have to do. We're being attacked, and if you don't go along with us, we'll just say you're unpatriotic, and you better roll over and do as we tell you.
Yeah, exactly. There was a recent poll that less than 3% of Venezuelans believe that Guaido is their president. So I guess in the U.S. style of democracy,
that should be a failure.
Yeah, he's got a victory. But there's a real danger now, and that's why we did the show about this. The two things happening at once. And, doesn't mean that the president will listen to us, but we think it's a great time to change the foreign policy team. Pompeo's a disaster. He's going to lead the U.S. down a path of disaster. It's going to be a destruction of the presidency. So it would be a great time to make that change before the change is made for you. I also, again, want to thank our viewers who have tuned in increasing numbers. Our numbers have gone way up. People are hungry to get a different perspective. We don't have the monopoly on the truth, but we try to provide a different perspective, a different analysis, and hopefully people can draw their own conclusions. We're happy that you're here. I would encourage people to subscribe to this channel as well as go to ronpaulinstitute.org and subscribe to our newsletter. And if you want to help us keep the show going, by the way, while you're over at our website, you can make a donation. It's tax-deductible donation to the Ron Paul Institute, so that we can keep bringing you the Ron Paul Liberty Report. And thanks again for watching.
Thank you. Good, Daniel. The thing that I mention so often in all my efforts is a philosophic principle, because I think that makes the difference. I think it's the philosophy of a country, the role of government, the attitude of the people makes all the difference in the world. I mean, we don't have Keynesian interventionism, inflationism, and policy overseas if the people didn't endorse it. But the status quo, the leaders of the country, the great professionals in our universities all support it. So it is philosophic. But I want to make another point. We talk about this a little bit. I make it still secondary, but it sort of gives support to the first. The philosophy is very important. We have to have true believers. But the other one is a close second, and that has to do with pragmatism. What about the policy? What if you measure the policy? What if we could objectively put up the two policy of less intervention, because we still always seem to have too much intervention, and a whole lot of interventions, avoiding the wars? What if we didn't initiate one war in the Middle East in the last 20 years? Why shouldn't the pragmatic answer be, why don't they look at that and say, what we've done is absolutely a failure. And people do come around and they say, it was a stupid war. Matter of fact, Trump actually won the election because he was the peace candidate and made a position that it was a dumb war. And yet the pragmatic argument falls short as well as the philosophic. Philosophic is good. And that's why we should believe in non-intervention and personal liberties and minding our own business, bring our troops home, have sound money. And that will take care of things. And then eventually people will say, this is a good idea. Pragmatically, it's good. And the argument has been made for a good many years that we have rejected that freedom and liberty and sound money and no authoritarian approach from the Federal Reserve. The results are a large middle class, but the middle class has been destroyed. and it's been destroyed because of bad philosophy. So there should be a mixture of the philosophy, which gives us good programs, and then people decide, you know, this is a good idea because it's working, and I have my liberty. We need to get people to think about personal liberty and say, I love my liberty. I want to take care of myself. I want to have my own life. I own my life. I want to control the money I earn, and I think it's a good idea. Our government does the same thing with foreign nation. Just stay out of the affairs of other countries, bring our troops home. I think it's the road to peace and prosperity, and that is what we work so hard for on this program. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.